Your support keeps these stories alive. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Divorce is never easy. Even when you think you're prepared for it, even when you see it coming, the aftermath is always heavier than you expect. My ex-husband and I finalized ours in 2018. By then, our marriage had been hollowed out by years of strain, unspoken resentment, and the kind of cold silences that do more damage than shouting ever could. When the papers were signed, I thought I knew what I was walking away from: a broken marriage, a man who no longer saw me as his partner, a home that no longer felt like one. But I didn't expect to become, once again, the mother in the shadows. Our daughter, his daughter by blood, my stepdaughter by every other measure, was 13 when we divorced. I had been in her life since she was 3 months old. I had cradled her when she was feverish, cut the crusts off her sandwiches, tied her shoelaces on mornings she was running late, and sat in gymnasiums cheering louder than anyone else at her basketball games. In her eyes and in mine, I wasn't just Dad's wife. I was Mom, maybe not legally, maybe not biologically, but in every other sense that matters. And yet, in the cold ink of court orders, she belonged to him. Her biological mother had been out of the picture for years, unstable, inconsistent, drifting in and out of jobs, apartments, and promises. The court had awarded physical custody to my ex-husband for that very reason, because her mother had been found neglectful, incapable of providing the stable life a child deserves. So when the divorce was final, the arrangement was clear on paper: she lived with him. But paper doesn't raise children, people do. And almost immediately, reality veered off course. He didn't want her. I know how brutal that sounds, but there's no softer way to put it. Within weeks of the divorce, he left her in my care temporarily, saying he needed to sort things out. "It's just for a little while," he said, but days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and suddenly it wasn't temporary anymore. She was mine. Not legally, not officially, but in every practical way. For a year, she lived under my roof, ate at my table, slept in the bedroom we painted together. I became the one who signed her permission slips, who drove her to practices, who reminded her to brush her teeth before bed, and I didn't complain because she was my girl, my responsibility, my heart. Then, just when I thought the arrangement had quietly solidified into something permanent, her biological mother swooped back in. She picked her up for a weekend visit and simply didn't bring her back. It felt like being robbed, not just of a child but of stability, of the fragile normalcy I had pieced together from the ruins of my marriage. For weeks, I lived in limbo, waiting for updates, terrified of what was happening in a house that had already proven unsafe. And when the court finally ordered her return to her father, I thought foolishly that maybe he would step up. Instead, the day she came back to him, he dropped her off at my doorstep. "Take her," he said, "she's better with you." And so, just like that, I became the only real parent she had left. When he left her with me, there was no court order, no signed agreement, no protective stamp of legality that said, "This child belongs here with you." It was just a doorstep handoff and a single sentence that rang in my ears for weeks after: "She's better with you." Part of me wanted to scream, because if she was better with me, why hadn't he fought for her? Why hadn't he stood up in court and said the truth out loud? Why was it always me patching the cracks he left behind? But I didn't scream, because she was standing right there. And she was 13, old enough to feel the rejection, old enough to understand the weight of being given away. So instead, I smiled, I hugged her. I told her that her room was ready, that dinner was already on the stove, and that everything was going to be okay. And then I spent the next 5 years trying to make that true. Life settled into a rhythm, the kind that feels ordinary on the surface but carries unspoken heroics underneath. Mornings were a whirlwind of cereal bowls, missing shoes, forgotten homework. Evenings were carpools to practices, dinners eaten too quickly, arguments over screen time. Her younger brother, my son, 12 at the time, shared the house too. In some ways they balanced each other, her teenage moods against his boyish energy, her seriousness against his silliness. They fought, of course, slammed doors, threw accusations like darts, but they also curled up together on the couch watching cartoons, shared snacks, whispered secrets at night when they thought I couldn't hear. And through it all, my husband, my current husband, stood beside me, not as a replacement father, not trying to erase anyone, but as a steady hand on my back. Together, we became the team she needed. He paid bills, I managed the chaos, and between us we created the one thing she hadn't had consistently in her entire life: stability. It wasn't easy. There were nights when I collapsed into bed, too tired to even wash the dishes. There were mornings when I looked at the clock, panicked because the carpool was late and I still hadn't signed the permission slip. There were soccer practices that ended in tears, late-night talks about friends who weren't really friends, and report cards that felt like progress reports on my parenting as much as hers. But there were also moments that lit up the whole house. Her grin when she scored her first basket in a real game. Her whispered "thank you" after I stayed up helping her finish a project at midnight. The casual way she introduced me at school as my mom, not stepmom, not dad's ex, just mom. Those moments made it worth it. They reminded me why I kept showing up, even when neither of her biological parents did. And slowly we built something real, something fragile but solid, something no court order could take away, a home. But the thing about fragile things is that it only takes one careless move to threaten them. And in our case, that move came when money entered the equation. For years, her biological mother didn't argue. She knew her daughter was with me, she knew I was the one buying groceries, signing papers, staying up nights, and for the most part she let it be. She came and went, a weekend here, a holiday there, and then disappeared again into the fog of transitioning. Transitioning between jobs, apartments, boyfriends, transitioning between promises she never kept. And as much as I hated it, I also respected the quiet. At least she wasn't dragging our daughter through the courts. At least she wasn't making her choose between chaos and stability. But that changed the moment child support came up. You see, legally, she still owed. Dad, my ex-husband, had court-ordered custody, which meant that by law she had to pay him child support. It wasn't much, barely enough to cover a fraction of sports fees, clothes, or school supplies, but it was something. A tangible sign that she had a responsibility in all this, even if she barely showed up in practice. For years, she paid irregularly, late, incomplete, but it was money that helped keep the lights on, so my ex never let it go. Then one day she refused. She told him flat out if he didn't dismiss the order, she'd fight for custody, full custody. And that's when the ground started shifting beneath us again. At first, I thought it was an empty threat. She hadn't shown consistency in a decade. She hadn't kept a stable job, hadn't held onto a lease, hadn't even exercised her right to regular visitation. Why would a judge hand her a child she hadn't made a priority in years? But then I learned she had something new on her side: free legal representation. Her transitional housing program had connected her to resources, people who would help her file. And suddenly, all those years of neglect didn't matter. All that mattered was her claim that Dad had abandoned his daughter and she was stepping in to take her back. And in a way, she wasn't wrong. Dad had stepped out. He may still have custody on paper, but in practice, he sent her to me and barely looked back. He sent money for clothes, paid for basketball fees, but he wasn't the one driving her home from practice, cooking her dinners, or sitting up with her when nightmares shook her awake. It was me, always me. So the question hung heavy in the air. If she filed, where did that leave me? Not as a parent, not as a guardian. Not as anything the law would recognize. Just the woman who loved her enough to stay. I don't think anyone can understand this kind of fear unless they've lived it. It's not the fear of losing a job or a house or even a marriage. It's the fear of losing a child who has been your child in every way that matters except on paper. Every night I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, running through the same nightmare. A judge's gavel striking down, a courtroom echoing with words like biological mother, custody, rights, and me standing there invisible, unacknowledged. As if the last 13 years of scraped knees, parent-teacher conferences, bedtime stories, and birthday cakes never happened. Because to the law, they didn't. There were moments I caught myself staring at her across the kitchen table, memorizing her face the way you memorize a place before you move away. I'd wonder if she's taken from me, will she remember these mornings? The way I made her oatmeal just the way she liked it? The way I slipped notes into her lunchbox before tests? Will she remember that it was me, not her mother, who braided her hair before picture day? And worse, will she think I let her go? Because how do you explain to a child that love doesn't always win in court? The anger would come in waves too. I was furious at her mother for swooping in only when money was at stake, for treating custody like a bargaining chip instead of a responsibility. Furious at my ex for being so quick to hand her off, for leaving me to shoulder everything while still holding the title of custodial parent. But mostly, I was furious at a system that didn't see me. Didn't see the bills in my name, the school records with my signature, the medical forms I filled out, the countless hours I poured into building this girl's life. None of it mattered unless someone with blood ties or legal paperwork said it did. And no one had given me either. I tried to keep the fear hidden from her. I smiled through it the way mothers do, but children know they always know. One night as I tucked her in, she asked, "Are you going to make me live with her?" The question hit me like a knife. I held her hand, kissed her forehead, and promised, "I will fight for you no matter what, you belong here." And in that moment, I meant it with every fiber of my being. Even if the law never would. I had always believed that love was enough. That if you showed up every day in every way that mattered, the world would recognize you as what you were. A mother. But the law doesn't speak the language of love. It speaks the language of paperwork. So I started making calls. To lawyers, to legal aid offices, to anyone who would listen. I Googled words like guardianship, custodial rights, standing. I stayed up until 2 a.m. reading through forums, blogs, articles, stories from other step-parents who had lived this nightmare. And over again, I saw the same phrase that made my stomach drop. You may not have standing. Standing, such a small word for such a devastating wall. Because even after raising her, feeding her, clothing her, guiding her through 5 years of adolescence, I wasn't her legal parent. I wasn't her guardian. I wasn't her blood. To the court, I might as well have been a babysitter who overstayed her welcome. I remember one call in particular with a family lawyer. I told her everything: the years of abandonment, the court's findings of neglect, the fact that both biological parents had stepped away and left her with me. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then the lawyer said gently, "You've been her mother in every sense, but if the biological parents decide to fight this out in court, you could be sidelined." I asked her, my voice breaking, "But what about what's best for the child? Isn't that what the court is supposed to care about?" She sighed. "It is, but you need legal authority to even make that argument." That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my current husband, piles of printouts spread around us. Words blurred together: petition for guardianship, third-party custody, best interests of the child. I wanted clarity. What I got was contradiction. Some cases showed step-parents winning custody, others showed them erased entirely. It all came down to the judge. To how much weight they gave to biology versus stability. To whether they saw me as a mother, or just as the woman who filled in when no one else would. And here's the cruelest part. For years, her mother hadn't cared. She hadn't asked for weekends, hadn't fought for holidays, hadn't even bothered with regular phone calls. She let me be the one until money got in the way. Now suddenly she wanted to play the role. Not because her daughter needed her, but because child support became an inconvenience. And I was left asking myself the same question over and over. How can someone who walks in and out at will be recognized as mother, while the one who never leaves might not even get a voice? Every morning started the same way: alarm clock, breakfast rush, backpacks at the door. But beneath the routine there was a constant hum in my chest, a knot that never loosened. What if this was the last month she lived here? What if next year's first day of school photo didn't happen in front of this house, with me behind the camera? What if she was gone before I could even say goodbye? It changed how I looked at everything. When I dropped her off at basketball practice, I caught myself staring at her through the car window a little too long, memorizing the way she tossed her hair into a messy ponytail. When we walked through the grocery store, I found myself slowing down just to hear her chatter about snacks or new music, tucking every word away in my mind like evidence. I felt like I was living on borrowed time. She didn't know it, not fully, but I think she sensed it. Kids always do. One night, while she was working on homework at the kitchen table, she looked up at me and asked, "Do I have to go live with her now?" I froze. Tried to smile, tried to keep my voice even. "No, sweetie, not unless a judge says so." Her eyes widened. "A judge like in court?" I nodded. She went quiet for a long moment, then said softly, "But I don't want to." It shattered me because that was the heart of it: the child's voice, the child's choice, and yet I knew how easily that could be drowned out by paperwork and legal language and arguments about rights. The fear followed me into the nights too. I'd lie in bed listening to the soft sounds of my husband breathing beside me, staring at the ceiling. My mind replayed every worst-case scenario: a knock on the door, papers served, court date set, her crying as someone told her to pack a bag. I'd press my fists into my chest, as if I could physically hold her there, keep her heart close to mine so no one could take it away. And then there was the anger. Every time my ex-husband went a week without checking in, I felt it burning. He had the custody, he had the legal power, but when it came to the day-to-day, he was a ghost. Every time her mother missed another holiday, then popped up again with threats when money came into play, I wanted to scream. And every time I looked at my stepdaughter, my daughter in every real way, I thought, you deserve better than all of this, better than two parents who won't fight for you and a system that won't see the one who does. But I couldn't let her see that anger or that fear. So I smiled, packed lunches, drove carpools, cheered at games, and carried the knot in my throat quietly, like a stone I couldn't swallow. Life in our house carried on: homework, late dinners, school runs, basketball practice, sibling arguments that ended in laughter. From the outside, we looked like any ordinary family. But inside there were ghosts. My ex-husband was one of them. He drifted in and out, never quite gone, never really there. Weeks would pass without a word. Then, out of nowhere, he'd send money for sports fees or text me asking if she needed new shoes, as if that could make up for the fact that he hadn't been to a single parent-teacher conference in years. Every time his name lit up on my phone, I felt the old anger rise. He had the custody, he had the title of father, and yet here I was doing it all, carrying it all, and he still had the nerve to treat me like a placeholder, like I was keeping his spot warm. But the truth was, he had given up that spot long ago. Then there was her biological mother. Unstable, unpredictable, a shadow that appeared and disappeared without warning. She'd go months without a call, then show up asking for a weekend, a dinner, a second chance. Sometimes my stepdaughter would say yes, sometimes she'd roll her eyes and say no. And when she did go, she always came back quieter, more guarded, as if she had learned once again that promises made by her mother were fragile things, easily broken. I tried not to say anything negative. I wanted her to make up her own mind, but inside I boiled, because how many times could a child be shown she wasn't the priority before it left a scar? And through it all, I watched both kids, my son and my stepdaughter, navigate the weight of it in their own ways. My son was protective, too protective sometimes. He'd make offhand comments like, "Mom's the only one who actually shows up." He carried his resentment like armor, sharp edges pointed at anyone who might hurt his sister. She, on the other hand, tried to shrug it off. She'd laugh, roll her eyes, pretend she didn't care. But I saw it, the way her shoulders tightened when her dad didn't text back, the way her smile faded when her mom canceled yet again. Children are experts at pretending. But mothers, real mothers, see through it. I found myself caught in the middle of ghosts and shadows. One parent absent, one unstable, both pulling at her in different ways while I stood in the middle holding her steady. But I knew deep down that if either of them decided to drag this into a courtroom, it wouldn't matter how steady I'd been. Because to the system, I was neither ghost nor shadow. I was invisible. By the time year 5 rolled around, the weight of it all had settled deep into my bones. I was tired. Not the kind of tired a nap could fix, but the kind that comes from living in a constant state of alert, always waiting for the other shoe to drop, always scanning the horizon for the storm I knew was coming. Every little thing became a trigger. An envelope in the mail with a government seal. A phone call from an unknown number. Even the sound of my daughter saying, "Mom," with hesitation in her voice. Because in the back of my mind I was always bracing for it, the petition, the court date, the day someone would try to rip her out of my hands. It started to seep into my days. At work, I found myself distracted, rereading the same email 3 times before responding. At dinner, I'd catch myself staring off, fork in hand, while the kids laughed about something silly I hadn't heard. My husband noticed. He'd put his hand over mine and ask, "Where did you go just now?" And I didn't know how to answer without sounding paranoid. Because the truth was, I was living in 2 worlds, the life we had built and the looming fear of losing it. The turning point came one night after practice. She climbed into the car, sweaty and smiling, holding up a medal from a small tournament win. I congratulated her, hugged her, told her how proud I was. But as we pulled into the driveway, she said quietly, "What happens if she takes me away?" I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. "Who told you that?" I asked. She shrugged. I heard her say it on the phone that she was going to get me back. I pulled over right there in front of our house and turned to her. "Listen to me," I said. "You are not something to be taken, you're not a prize or a possession, you are you, and I will fight for you, I don't care what it takes, I will not let anyone just come in and uproot your life." She nodded, biting her lip, trying to be brave, but I saw the tears brimming in her eyes. And in that moment I knew. It wasn't enough to just be her mother in practice. I had to become her mother in the eyes of the law too. That night after she went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my husband and said the words out loud. "I need to file guardianship, custody, something I need standing." He nodded without hesitation. "Then that's what we'll do, whatever it takes." And just like that, fear became resolve. Because I realized if I didn't stand up now, if I didn't claim my place in this child's life, I might lose her to people who had already proven they couldn't be trusted. The morning after that conversation, I made the first call. It wasn't to my ex, it wasn't to her mother. It was to a family law attorney I'd found after hours of scrolling through reviews and recommendations. I still remember the way my hands shook as I dialed the number. It felt like crossing a line I couldn't step back over. The consultation was blunt. The lawyer listened as I spilled everything: 5 years of raising her full-time, her parents' absence, her mother's instability, her father's neglect. I gave dates, details, even screenshots of texts where her dad had admitted she was better off with me. When I finally stopped, out of breath, the lawyer said, "You have a case, but it won't be easy. Guardianship, third-party custody." These were the words she used. Words that meant I could legally be recognized as more than a caretaker. But every option came with hurdles. Courts favored parents. Biology mattered more than history, and if her mother had free legal representation, she would fight tooth and nail to make me invisible. Still, the lawyer said something that stayed with me. "Judges care about stability. If you can prove you've been her stable parent, you'll have a voice." A voice. That was all I wanted, not to erase her mother, not to erase her father, but to stop being treated like I didn't exist. So I started collecting proof. School records with my name listed as emergency contact, doctor forms I had signed, photos of us at events, evidence of daily life not staged but real, permission slips, carpool schedules, receipts for clothes and sports fees. My entire dining table turned into a collage of motherhood. My husband helped me organize it all into folders. He labeled them neatly: school, medical, sports, daily life. At one point he looked at me and said, "You shouldn't have to prove this. Anyone who looks at her knows you're her mom." I smiled, but it hurt, because he was right. I shouldn't have to, but I did. Meanwhile, I had to keep living the double life. By day, I was just mom, driving to practices, checking homework, packing lunches. By night, I was the invisible parent building a legal case for recognition. There were moments when exhaustion hit me so hard I thought I couldn't do it. Moments when I questioned if I had the strength to drag my family through a courtroom battle. But then I'd hear her laugh in the next room, or see her sprawled on the couch, head on her brother's shoulder, talking about nothing and everything, and I'd remember why I had to keep going. Because love might not be enough on paper. But in a courtroom, love backed by proof could make me unignorable. The first ripple came when my ex found out. I hadn't called him directly. I let the lawyer send the notice. Cleaner that way, less room for him to twist my words. But it didn't stop him from calling me, his voice already raised before I could even say hello. "What the hell are you doing? Guardianship, custody, you know I'm her father, right?" His father, the word made my stomach turn. "Her father who hasn't shown up in months," I shot back. "Her father who left her on my doorstep and never looked back." He sputtered, searching for an argument. Finally he said, "I provide for her, I send money." And that's when I laughed, bitter, sharp. "Money isn't parenting," I said, "and you know it." He hung up on me, but I didn't shake, not this time, because deep down I think he knew if this ever reached a judge he'd have no defense. Then came her mother. Oh, she was livid, Furious texts, late-night voicemails, even a message through one of her relatives that said I was trying to steal her child. Steal, as if raising a girl for 13 years, feeding her, clothing her, wiping her tears was theft. I ignored most of it, but one message still echoes in my head. She's mine, not yours, mine. I wanted to scream back, then why wasn't she yours every time she begged you to show up? But I didn't, because I knew she wouldn't hear me. The hardest reaction, though, came from the girl herself. She overheard me one night on the phone with my lawyer. I thought she was in her room, headphones on, but suddenly she was standing in the doorway, her eyes wide. "Are you fighting for me?" she asked. I froze. My husband set down his coffee cup slowly. I nodded, "Yes, I am." She bit her lip. "Does that mean like court?" I sighed, "Maybe, if that's what it takes." There was a long silence, then she whispered, "Do I get to say what I want?" My throat tightened. I crossed the room, knelt in front of her, and took her hands. "Yes, you do, you always do, and I'll make sure they hear it." She nodded, trying to be brave, but I saw the tears in her eyes, not from fear of me but from fear that once again her future wasn't really hers to decide. That night after she went to bed, my husband said quietly, "You know this won't just be a legal fight, it's going to be emotional, messy, painful for all of you." I nodded, "I know, but I can't just sit back and let them decide she's property to be passed around. She deserves better. She deserves to stay in the only home that's ever been stable." And for the first time in a long time, I felt something stronger than fear. Resolve. Because now, it wasn't just about keeping her safe today. It was about securing her future in black and white on paper, where no one could erase me again. Once the decision was made, the real work began. My lawyer told me plainly, "The court doesn't want feelings, it wants proof." So I set out to gather proof, not just in papers but in people. The first call I made was to her school. Her homeroom teacher didn't hesitate. "Of course I'll vouch for you," she said. "You've been the one in every parent meeting, you're the one who responds to emails, signs forms, shows up when she needs something." Hearing that validation brought me to tears, because for so long I had been terrified that the outside world only saw me as stepmom. But here was someone, an authority, someone who spent hours each week with my daughter saying what I had always known: I was the parent who showed up. Then came her basketball coach. "She calls you mom," he said simply. "That's all I need to know. If you need me in court, I'll be there." I hung up the phone and cried again. It snowballed from there. Neighbors, family, friends, parents of her teammates. Every single one of them had the same story. They saw me at the games, at the recitals, at the school fundraisers. They saw me driving the carpools, baking for bake sales, sitting in the bleachers. And every time I felt a little stronger, a little less invisible. At home, my husband became my rock. He kept files organized, highlighted key documents, created a binder thicker than a phone book. He treated it like a mission, something we could win if we just stayed focused. But late at night, when the house was quiet, I felt the cracks in my armor. I'd sit at the kitchen table surrounded by papers and whisper to myself, "What if it's not enough?" Because I knew biology still cast a long shadow, and no matter how many witnesses I had, no matter how many receipts I collected, there was still the brutal truth: she had a mother, she had a father, and I was neither. Meanwhile, my daughter began to sense the shift. One evening, as we folded laundry together, she asked, "Why do you need all this proof? Don't they know already?" I hesitated, because how do you explain bureaucracy to a child? How do you tell her that a system designed to protect her might also betray her? Finally I said, "Sometimes the people who make decisions don't see the whole picture. I need to show them what's real." She thought about it for a moment, then said softly, I'll tell them you're my mom." The simplicity of it undid me, because in her eyes it was that clear, but in court, I knew her words would be tested, twisted, maybe even ignored. Still, it gave me strength. Because if nothing else, I had her truth on my side. By the time the petition was drafted, I had a binder of documents, a list of witnesses, and a determination that no longer shook under the weight of fear. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just reacting to their threats. I was preparing to fight back. Once word spread that I had filed, everything changed. Her mother became relentless. Suddenly, she was calling more often, asking to see her, showing up unannounced with gifts she couldn't afford. There were promises, grand, glittering promises. When you come live with me, you'll have your own room, we'll go shopping, I'll take you on trips. It wasn't parenting, it was bribery dressed up as love. And my daughter, caught in the middle, didn't know how to process it. She wanted to believe her mother. She wanted to believe this time would be different. But I saw the hesitation in her eyes, the way she looked at me when her mom made those promises, as if asking silently, "Do you think she means it?" I never lied to her, I never said no, I only said, "I hope she keeps her word this time." But inside I burned. Her father, meanwhile, took the opposite approach. He withdrew even further. No calls, no visits, no questions. It was as if he had decided that silence would keep him safe, that if he didn't pick a side, he couldn't be blamed. But his silence was an answer. And it was one my daughter noticed. "Why doesn't Dad ever call me?" she asked one night. I didn't know how to respond, so I told her the truth. "I don't know." Because really I didn't, and maybe I never would. At home, the air felt heavy. Normal life carried on: homework, dinners, chores, but underneath it all was the constant awareness that everything was at stake. I started to see the toll it took on her. She grew quieter, more withdrawn. Little things upset her more easily. She snapped at her brother over nothing, then cried afterward. She spent more time in her room, headphones in, music blasting, drowning out the noise of a war she never asked for. One evening, I found her journal on the coffee table. I didn't read it, I couldn't. But the sight of it there, left open just a crack, made me realize how much she was carrying silently. She was only 13, and already she was being treated like a prize in a custody game. And it made me sick. Meanwhile, I tried to hold it together, for her, for all of us. I still made her favorite dinners, still drove her to practice, cheered from the sidelines, celebrated her wins. I laughed at her jokes, hugged her tight, told her every day that she mattered. But at night, after she was in bed, I'd sit at the kitchen table with my husband and whisper the questions that ate at me. What if it doesn't matter? What if the judge doesn't see? What if all this proof, all these years, mean nothing? He would squeeze my hand, look me in the eye, and say, "Then we fight harder." And I clung to those words like a lifeline. Because I had to believe that love plus proof, love plus stability would be enough. It had to be. I always knew she was strong. But I didn't realize just how strong until the day she sat in a chair across from the guardian ad litem, the court-appointed advocate meant to represent her best interests, and told the truth without hesitation. The meeting was at her school in a quiet office tucked away from the noise of the hallways. I wasn't allowed in, and maybe that was for the best. This had to be her space, her moment. When she came out after nearly an hour, her eyes were red but her back was straight. I asked gently, "How did it go?" She looked at me, voice steady, and said, "I told her I want to stay here, with you." Later, the guardian ad litem called me. "She was very clear," she said. "She knows where her stability is, she feels safe with you, that matters." I pressed the phone to my ear, heart pounding. "Will the judge listen?" The woman hesitated, then replied, "Children aren't always given full weight in these decisions, but her voice is strong, it will make an impact." And in that moment I felt both relief and sorrow, relief that she had spoken, sorrow that she had to. Because no child should have to sit in an office and plead for the right to stay in the only home they've ever truly known. At home, she seemed lighter afterward, almost as if saying it out loud gave her power. One night at dinner, she said to her brother, half joking, "They can argue all they want, I already told them where I belong." He grinned, nodded, and replied, "Duh, with us." I laughed through tears I tried to hide, because in their simple exchange was the truth I had been fighting to prove with binders and witnesses. She was ours, not by blood but by bond, not by court order but by love. Of course, her mother didn't take it well. Word got back that the guardian ad litem knew her daughter wanted to stay with me, and the texts started again. "She's just manipulated. She's too young to know what's good for her. You put those words in her mouth." Every accusation was a knife, but I refused to engage. Because I didn't need to defend myself against lies when the truth was already living in my house, eating at my table, calling me mom. Still, the weight of what was coming pressed down on me harder than ever. Because now it wasn't just my fight. It was hers too. And I knew that soon her words, raw, honest, and unpolished, would be laid out in a courtroom for strangers to interpret. I just prayed they'd hear her the way I did. The week before the hearing, our house felt like it was holding its breath. Even the walls seemed quieter, as if they knew every word spoken inside might one day be repeated in a courtroom. My husband and I spent evenings at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, organizing exhibits like soldiers preparing for battle. School records, medical notes, photos, receipts, witness statements, every page another piece of the life we had built. At one point, I held up a picture of her in her basketball uniform, grinning with a medal around her neck, and I whispered, "How could anyone not see where she belongs?" My husband squeezed my hand. "We'll make them see." Meanwhile, the kids carried the weight in their own ways. My son grew restless, protective in a way that broke my heart. He kept asking if he could talk to the judge too, if he could tell them how his sister needed to stay. I told him gently that this wasn't his burden to carry, but he carried it anyway, shoulders tense, fists clenched at the mention of their mother. My daughter, on the other hand, went quiet, too quiet. She still went to practice, still laughed at TikToks with her friends, but when she came home, she'd retreat to her room. One night I found her sitting cross-legged on the floor, headphones in, staring at old photos she'd dug out of a drawer, photos of her as a toddler in my arms, in our home. She looked up at me and asked softly, "Why do we have to prove this? Don't they already know I belong here?" I sat beside her, brushing her hair back, my throat aching. Sometimes the people who make decisions don't see what's right in front of them, so we have to show them. She nodded, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. 13 years old, and already she knew the cruel truth: love alone doesn't always win. As the court date loomed closer, I felt myself pulled between two worlds. In one, I was just mom, cooking dinner, driving to school, cheering in the stands. In the other, I was a litigant, a petitioner, a woman who had to prove she wasn't a stranger. The contradiction tore at me. Because how do you boil down a lifetime of mothering into a binder and a few hours before a judge? How do you explain sleepless nights, whispered secrets, inside jokes, and unconditional love in legal language? The night before the hearing, I barely slept. I stood in her doorway for a long time, watching her breathe in the soft glow of her nightlight. She looked so peaceful, so safe, tucked under the blanket we'd picked out together years ago. And I whispered to myself like a prayer, "Please let them see her peace, let them see what's at stake." Because tomorrow, strangers would decide if that peace survived. The courthouse smelled like old paper and fear. That's the only way I can describe it, the stale quiet of a place where lives are dissected, futures decided. I clutched the binder in my arms like a shield. My husband walked beside me, steady and calm, but I could feel the tension radiating from him. Behind us, my daughter walked slowly, eyes wide, taking everything in. "Do I have to talk?" she whispered. "Only if you want to," I said, "and only to tell the truth, nothing more." She nodded, small but brave. Inside the courtroom, her mother was already there, dressed carefully, posture stiff, eyes darting everywhere but mine. My ex sat beside her, looking uncomfortable, like a man who wanted to disappear into the wood-paneled walls. I sat across from them, my hands trembling until I slid them under the table to hide it. The judge entered, everyone rose, and then it began. The lawyers spoke first, cold words, rehearsed arguments. Her mother's attorney painted me as an outsider, a meddler, someone who had inserted herself where she didn't belong. My chest burned at the words. Then my lawyer stood. She spoke of stability, of years, not weekends, of the countless ways I had been the constant presence in this child's life while others drifted. Piece by piece, the binder was laid before the court: school records, medical forms, photographs, witness statements from teachers, coaches, neighbors. And with each page, I felt myself becoming visible. Then it was her turn. My daughter was called into chambers to speak with the judge privately. I wasn't allowed in, neither was her mother, neither was I. I sat there, my hands gripping the edge of the bench, staring at the closed door, praying. Every second felt like an eternity. When she emerged, her eyes were red but her chin was high. She walked straight to me, sat down, and leaned against my arm without a word, and that said everything. Finally, the judge spoke. His voice was measured calm, but each sentence felt like a hammer striking. He acknowledged the mother's rights. He acknowledged the father's custody on paper. But then he said the words I will never forget. What matters most in this court is the child's best interests, and it is clear, abundantly clear, where those interests lie. He granted me legal guardianship. Not just in practice, not just in love, but on paper, in black and white. I cried then, I didn't mean to, but the tears came fast and unstoppable. My husband squeezed my shoulder, my daughter wrapped her arms around me. Her mother stormed out, my ex stayed seated head in hands, but none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was that the law had finally caught up to the truth. That I was no longer invisible. That my daughter's home, her peace, her life was secure. That night we went home, we ate takeout, laughed too loud, and for the first time in months slept without fear. I tucked her in, kissed her forehead and whispered, "You're safe for good." She smiled sleepily and whispered back, "I know, Mom." And that was it, the fight, the fear, the sleepless nights, they were all worth it for those 2 words. Because in the end, the court had given me guardianship. But she had given me the title long ago. Mom,